The morning sun cast long shadows across the Colorado Territory as Jack Sullivan rode his weathered bay mare along the Snake River's edge. 3 years had passed since he'd last seen these waters, 3 years since he'd fled this place with blood on his hands and shame in his heart. Now at 28, the lines around his green eyes spoke of hard winters and harder choices. The silver star pinned to his vest caught the light of deputy. Marshal's badge that felt heavier than the Colt .45 at his hip. He'd come back to make things right, to face the ghosts that haunted his dreams. But as his horse picked her way along the muddy bank, Jack heard something that made his blood run cold. A woman's scream, sharp and desperate above the river's roar. Without hesitation, he spurred his mare toward the sound. Around a bend in the river, he saw her young native woman thrashing in the churning water, her long black hair streaming behind her like a dark banner. The spring melt had swollen the Snake to a torrent, and she was losing her battle against the current. Jack didn't think. He kicked off his boots, shrugged out of his coat, and dove into the icy water. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath, but he fought through it, swimming hard toward the drowning woman. She went under just as he reached her, and he plunged beneath the surface, his lungs burning as he searched blindly in the murky water. His fingers found her wrist, then her arm. He hauled her up, breaking the surface with a gasp. She was unconscious, her lips blue with cold. Fighting the current with one arm while holding her with the other, Jack struggled toward shore. His boots slipped on the rocky bottom as he half-carried, half-dragged her from the water. On the bank, he turned her on, her side pressing her back until she coughed up river water. Her eyes fluttered opened, arc as midnight, filled with confusion and fear. She tried to sit up, but her strength failed her. "Easy," Jack said softly, wrapping his coat around her shivering form. "You're safe now." She studied his face with those penetrating dark eyes, as if trying to read his soul. When she spoke, her English was clear, but accented with the musical cadence of her people. You saved me." "Anyone would have done the same," Jack replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. In this territory, tensions between settlers and tribes ran as deep as the river itself. "I am Ayanna," she said, struggling to sit up. The name meant eternal blossom in her language, though Jack didn't know this yet. Jack Sullivan. He helped her to her feet, noting how she favored her left ankle. "Can you ride? Need to get you somewhere warm?" She nodded, though pain flickered across her delicate features. As Jack helped her onto his horse, their eyes met again, and something passed between them, a recognition that went deeper than words. It was as if the river had washed away more than just the dirt from their skin. It stripped away the barriers that should have stood between a white lawman and a native woman in 1882. The nearest settlement was Willow Creek, a rough frontier town where Jack had grown up, where he'd made the mistakes that drove him away. But Ayanna needed medical attention. Doc Peterson was the only physician for 100 miles as they rode. Ayanna pressed against his back for warmth, and Jack felt something stir in his chest that he thought had died 3 years ago. Sworn off love after what happened with Sarah, after his brother Tom's death. Love led to loss, and loss led to the kind of pain that could break a man. But the woman in his arms was different. Even soaked and shivering, there was a strength about her, a dignity that spoke of deep roots and unshakable faith. When she quietly began to sing a low, haunting melody in her native tongue, Jack felt tears he didn't understand prick his eyes. "What are you singing?" he asked. "A song of gratitude," she replied. "For the river that nearly took me, and for the man who brought me back." By the time they reached Willow Creek, word had already spread through the town's dusty main street. Faces appeared in windows, some curious, others hostile. Jack ignored them all. Carrying Ayanna straight to Doc Peterson's office above the general store, the old physician, a gruff man with kind eyes, asked no questions as he examined his patient. "Mild hypothermia, a sprained ankle, some scrapes and bruises," he pronounced. "She needs rest and warmth. I'll keep her here tonight for observation." As Doc Peterson tended to Ayanna, Jack found himself reluctant to leave. He sat in the waiting area, still damp from his river rescue, trying to understand what was happening to him. 3 years ago, he'd been engaged to Sarah Whitman, the banker's daughter. They'd had a future planned: a ranch, children, respectability. Then Tom died in what should have been a simple arrest, shot by a drunk cowboy who mistook him for someone else. Jack had tracked the man down in a blind rage and killed him in a gunfight that was barely legal. The violence of it, the way Sarah had looked at him afterward with fear instead of love, had driven him from Willow Creek with nothing but his horse and his guilt. Now, watching Doc Peterson care for a woman he'd just met, Jack felt something shifting inside him. The walls he'd built around his heart were developing cracks. "She's asking for you," Doc Peterson said, emerging from the back room. Jack found Ayanna sitting up in bed, wrapped in quilts, her long hair braided and hanging over one shoulder. Color had returned to her cheeks, and those midnight eyes were alert and watchful. "Thank you," she said simply. "You risked your life for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Jack replied, words coming out before he could stop them. Something flickered in her expression: surprise, or perhaps a recognition of the truth in his statement. "Where's your family, Jack Sullivan?" Wife, no family, just me and the badge." He touched the star on his vest. "I'm a deputy marshal now, working out of Denver. I came back to ... to settle some old business." "The business of the heart is never truly settled," Ayanna said, softly. "It follows us like shadows, even when we think we've outrun it." Before Jack could respond, voices rose from the street below. Through the window, he saw a crowd gathering, their faces tight with anger and suspicion. Someone shouted about Indian trouble, and Jack felt his jaw clench. "I should go," he said, standing. "Will I see you again?" The question was barely a whisper, but it hit Jack like a thunderbolt. He looked into her eyes and saw his future. They're dangerous, uncertain, but more real than anything he'd felt in years. "Yes," he said. "I promise." The crowd outside had grown larger by the time Jack emerged from Doc's office. Among the faces, he recognized old friends and enemies. People who remembered the angry young man who'd left Willow Creek in disgrace. "Jack." "Sullivan," called a voice from the crowd. "Heard you pulled some squaw out of the river." The speaker was Wade Morrison, a rancher with political ambitions and a mean streak a mile wide. He'd always resented Jack's family, the Sullivans' hood. Managed to build a successful spread despite starting with nothing. "I pulled a drowning woman out of the river," Jack replied evenly. "Her people shouldn't matter to anyone with half a conscience." "Her people matter plenty," Morrison shot back. "We've had 3 raids this month. Cattle stolen, fences cut. 4. All we know, she was scouting for another attack." "She was drowning, Wade. Not exactly tactical reconnaissance." But Morrison wasn't finished. "You always were too soft, Sullivan. It's like your brother. Look where it got him." It's a mention of Tom. Hit Jack like a physical blow. His hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but he forced himself to stop. This wasn't the time or place. Not with Ayanna upstairs, vulnerable and depending on him. "This conversation is over," Jack said, his voice carrying the authority of his badge. As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, Jack felt eyes watching him from windows and doorways. Word would spread quickly through the territory. The disgraced lawman was back, and he'd taken up with an Indian woman. Some would call it justice. Others would call it treason. That night, Jack took a room at the Willow Creek Hotel, but sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ayanna's face as she looked at him in the river trust and hope where there should have been only fear. He'd saved her life, but something told him she was about to save his soul. Dawn came. Gray and uncertain, mist rising from the river like ghosts. Jack was already dressed and walking toward Doc Peterson's office when he saw them 5 riders on a hill overlooking the town, their horses standing still as statues against the morning sky. Even at this distance, Jack could see they were native warriors, proud and watchful. They sat their horses with the easy grace of men born to the saddle, but there was tension in their posture, a readiness that spoke of barely contained violence. By the time Jack reached the doctor's office, a crowd had gathered again, this time. The mood was different, not angry curiosity, but genuine fear. "War party," someone whispered. "They've come for their woman," said another voice. Jack pushed through the crowd and climbed the stairs to Doc Peterson's office. He found Ayanna standing, At the window, fully dressed, her injured ankle wrapped, but bearing her weight. She was watching the riders with an expression he couldn't read. "Your people?" Jack asked. She nodded. "5 tribes? They've come to honor the debt." "What debt?" She turned to face him, and Jack saw something in her eyes that made his heart race not. Fear, but a kind of joy mixed with sorrow. "My culture, when someone saves a life, it creates a bond that cannot be broken. These warriors represent the 5 tribes of our confederation. They've come to offer gifts, to honor you for what you did. And after that, I must choose." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I can return with them to my people, where I belong, or ... or I can stay here with you and face whatever comes." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. Outside, the warriors had begun to move, riding slowly down the hill toward the town. Jack could hear the crowd growing restless, voices rising in alarm. "Ayanna," he said, stepping closer to her. "Yesterday I was a man with nothing to lose. Today, ... today I have everything to lose." He reached out and touched her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of a life of hard work, of survival. "I don't know what that means or where it leads, but I know I can't let you ride away." Her fingers intertwined with his, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only this room, this woman, and the impossible choice that lay before them both. "You don't understand," she said. "If I stay, there will be consequences. My father leads one of those tribes. He agreed to let me visit the white settlements, to learn their ways, to perhaps help build bridges between our peoples. But staying, choosing a white man over my own people, it could mean war. And if I go, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Tears gathered in her dark eyes. "I'll marry the warrior my father has chosen, bear his children, and try to forget the man who saved me from drowning and then saved me again in ways he'll never know." The sound of hoofbeats on the street below interrupted them. Jack looked out the window and saw the 5 warriors riding into town in formation, their horses prancing with controlled energy. Each man carried a lance decorated with feathers and beads, and their faces were painted for ceremony. But it was their leader who caught Jack's attention, a man of perhaps 50, with silver streaking his black hair and eyes like flint. Even from a distance, Jack could see the resemblance to Ayanna. "Your father," he said. She nodded, her hand tightening on his. "Chief Running Bear. He's a good man, but he believes the old ways are the only ways. He's never trusted whites, and after what happened to our people at Sand Creek at Wounded Knee, can you blame him?" Jack couldn't. The history between their peoples was written in blood and betrayal, and he was asking her to bridge a gap that had claimed thousands of lives. It was selfish and impossible, and probably doomed to failure. But as he looked into her eyes, he knew he had to try. "Come with me," he said. Together they descended to the street, where a crowd of townspeople had gathered at a respectful distance from the visiting warriors. The tension was thick enough to cut, hands hovering near gun belts, children pressed close to their mothers' skirts. Chief Running Bear dismounted when he saw his daughter, his weathered face betraying no emotion. The other warriors remained on their horses, but Jack could feel their eyes on him. Weighing and measuring, Ayanna spoke first, in her native language, her words flowing like music. Jack couldn't understand them, but he caught the emotion: respect, love, and something that sounded like an apology. Her father listened without interruption, then turned his gaze to Jack. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear. "You are the one who saved my daughter's life." "Yes, sir," Jack replied, instinctively touching his hat brim in respect. "She tells me you are a lawman, that you wear the white man's star, but carry honor in your heart." "Yeah." Jack felt the weight of the entire town watching this exchange. "Ain't one wrong." Word could spark violence that would echo across the territory for years to come. "I try to be an honorable man, Chief Running Bear. I don't always succeed, but I try." The chief studied him for a long moment, then nodded to his warriors. One by one, they dismounted and began unloading gifts from their pack horses' beautiful blankets, woven with intricate patterns. Beadwork that caught the morning light like captured rainbows. A hand-carved peace pipe that spoke of countless sacred Ceremonies. These gifts honor the debt between us, Running Bear said formally. You risked your life for one of our people, asking nothing in return.
Yes!
This is the way of true warriors, regardless of the color of their skin. The crowd murmured in amazement as the gifts were laid out on blankets in the street. Jack had expected hostility, perhaps even violence. Instead, he was witnessing something that might have been taken from a different world, a ceremony of honor and respect that transcended the hatred that had divided their peoples for so long. But he could see, in Running Bear's eyes, that the ceremony was also a farewell. The chief expected his daughter to return with him, to take her place in the tribe and fulfill her obligations to her people. Chief Running Bear, Jack said, his voice carrying across the silent street, I want to ask for your daughter's hand. In marriage, the words fell like stones into still water, ripples of shock spreading through both the tribal delegation and the townspeople. Ayanna gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Her father's expression didn't change, but Jack saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect for his boldness. You asked for something that cannot be given, Running Bear said finally. My daughter has obligations to her people. She is promised a strong eagle, a warrior of proven courage. Their union will strengthen the bonds between two tribes. I understand that, sir. But I'm not asking you to break those bonds. I'm asking you to forge new ones. Jack stepped forward, his hands at his sides to show he carried no weapons. Your daughter saved my life as surely as I saved hers. Showed me that there could be hope where I thought there was only darkness. If she'll have me, I want to spend my life building bridges between our peoples, not burning them. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then Ayanna stepped forward, her chin raised in defiance and determination. Father, she said in English, clearly wanting everyone to understand, I honor you and our people. I always will. But I cannot marry Strong Eagle when my heart belongs to another. I cannot live a lie, even for the good of the tribe. Running Bear's composure finally cracked, pain flashing across his weathered features. Daughter, you do not understand what you ask. To marry outside the tribe, to choose a white man, it would divide our people. Some would call you traitor. Others would say I have failed as a father and a leader. Then let me prove them wrong. Ayanna said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Let me show them that love doesn't weaken us, it makes us stronger. That building bridges doesn't mean abandoning who we are, it means becoming who we're meant to be. She turned to Jack, and in her eyes he saw his future, not the safe, predictable life he'd once planned with Sarah, but something wild and uncertain and infinitely more precious. If you'll have me, she said, echoing his earlier words, I want to spend my life building those bridges with you. Before Jack could respond, a new voice cut through the morning air, harsh, mocking, and all too familiar. How touching, Wade Morrison said, pushing through the crowd with several of his men, flanking him. A savage and a failure, thinking they can play at being civilized? Jack felt his blood turn to ice. Of all the times for Morrison to make his move, he'd chosen the worst possible moment. The rancher's men were armed and positioned strategically. Around the crowd, this wasn't a chance encounter. It was a planned confrontation. Walk away, Wade, Jack warned, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. I don't think so. Morrison's smile was cold as winter. See, I had time to think about our conversation yesterday. I realized you were right about something. This is the perfect time to settle old business. The tribal warriors had remounted their horses at the first sign of trouble, their lances held ready. The townspeople were backing away, sensing violence in the air. But Running Bear remained on foot beside his daughter, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. You killed my cousin Danny 3 years ago, Morrison continued, his voice carrying across the street. Shot him down in cold blood, and then ran like the coward you are. But you came back, didn't you? I came back thinking you could hide behind that star and play the hero. Danny Morrison was a murderer, Jack replied, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. Killed my brother Tom during a bank robbery. I gave him a fair fight, which is more than Tom got. Fair fight? Morrison laughed harshly. You hunted him down like an animal? And now you want to add insult to injury by taking up with this Indian whore? The words hit Jack like a physical blow, but before he could react, Ayanna stepped between. "Them stop," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "Ah! There's been enough death, enough hatred. My people and yours have bled this land red with our feuds. When will it end?" "It ends when justice is served," Morrison snarled. "Starting with your boyfriend here." Went for his gun, but Jack was faster. 3 years of working as a deputy. Marshal in the violent towns of Colorado had kept his reflexes sharp. His Colt .45 cleared leather in a smooth, practiced motion. The hammer falling as Morrison's weapon was still rising. The shot echoed across the street like thunder. Morrison staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his gun falling to the dust. His men hesitated, suddenly facing not just Jack's smoking Colt, but the raised lances of 5 tribal warriors who had read the situation perfectly. "It's over, Wade," Jack said, his gun still trained on the wounded rancher. "Your cousin got exactly what he deserved, and you know it. The only question now is whether you want to join him in the ground or in a jail cell." Morrison's face was white with pain and rage, but he wasn't finished. With his good hand, he pulled a hidden derringer from his vest, swinging it toward Ayanna with desperate malice. "If I can't have justice," he gasped, "I'll have revenge."
Ow.
Time slowed to a crawl. Jack saw the small gun rising, saw Morrison's finger tightening on the trigger, saw Ayanna's eyes widen with realization. He threw himself forward, trying to shield her with his body, but he knew he'd be too late. The gunshot came from an unexpected direction, Chief, Running Bear's rifle. Fired with the deadly accuracy of a man who had fought for his people's survival, his entire life. Morrison crumpled to the street, the derringer falling unfired from his lifeless fingers, in the stunned silence that followed. Running Bear lowered his smoking rifle and looked at his daughter and the man who had tried to die. "For her, a warrior protects those who cannot protect themselves," he said quietly. "A father protects his child, even when that child chooses a path he cannot understand." Ayanna was in Jack's arms now, tears streaming down her face. Around them, the crowd began to disperse. The immediate danger passed, but the larger questions, still hanging in the air like smoke. "What happens now?" Jack asked, looking at the chief over Ayanna's head. Running Bear considered the question for a long moment, his weathered hand still holding his rifle. "Now we see if love is stronger than hate, if bridges can truly be built from the ashes of war." He turned to his warriors, speaking rapidly in their native language. Jack caught fragments, words that sounded like honor and courage and new path. When the chief finished, the warriors nodded solemnly, their faces grave but accepting. "Daughter has made her choice," Running Bear said finally. "As her father, I must respect that choice, even if I do not fully understand it. But know this, Lamanith, you hurt her. If you betray the trust she places in you, there is no place on this earth where you can hide from my justice." "I understand, sir," Jack replied, "and I give you my word. I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of that trust." The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church at the edge of Willow Creek. It was unlike anything the town had ever seen, a ceremony that blended 2 cultures, 2 sets of traditions, 2 peoples who had been enemies for generations. Ayanna wore a white dress made by the town's seamstress, but over it she wore a beaded vest created by the women of her tribe. Jack stood at the altar in his best suit, but pinned to his lapel was a feather given to him by Chief Running Bear, a symbol of honor and acceptance that meant more to him than any badge he'd ever worn. The church was packed with an unusual congregation. Townspeople sat alongside tribal members, former enemies sharing the same pews, united in their curiosity about this unprecedented union. Doc Peterson served as Jack's best man, while Ayanna's younger sister, Winona, had ridden in from the reservation to serve as her maid of honor as they exchanged vows. Jack thought about the path that had brought him to this moment. 3 years ago, he'd been a broken man fleeing his mistakes. Today, he was standing before God in 2 communities, promising to love and protect the woman who had saved his soul. Do you, Jack Sullivan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part? "I do," Jack said, his voice strong and sure. "Do you, Ayanna, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part?" "I do," she replied, her eyes never leaving his face. As they kissed to seal their union, the church erupted in applause from both communities. Outside, gunshots fired into the air in celebration, and drums began to beat in the ancient rhythm of joy, but it was later, as the sun set over the Colorado Territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, that Jack truly understood what he had gained. He and Ayanna stood on the porch of their new home, a small ranch house built on land donated by the town as a wedding gift, watching their guests celebrate in the yard below. Members of 5 tribes mingled with ranchers and shopkeepers, sharing food and stories and laughter. Children played together regardless of the color of their skin, their games a promise of what the future might hold. And in the center of it all, Chief Running Bear sat with Mayor Stevens, the two leaders deep in conversation about water rights and trade agreements. "You did it," Jack said softly, pulling his wife closer to his side. "You built your bridge." "Built it," Ayanna corrected, "and it's just the beginning." She was right, of course. There would be challenges ahead. Prejudice and hatred didn't disappear overnight, and change came slowly to the frontier. There would be those on both sides who would never accept their union, who would see it as betrayal rather than hope. But as Jack held his wife in his arms, watching their two people celebrate together under the endless western sky, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete and perfect peace. He had found his place in the world at last, not as a white man or a lawman or even a husband, but as a bridge builder, a peacemaker. A man who had learned that love was indeed stronger than hate. The river that had nearly claimed Ayanna's life had instead brought them together, washing away the sins of the past and carrying them toward a future bright with possibility. And as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jack Sullivan knew that he was exactly where he belonged, in the arms of the woman who had saved his life by showing him how to live again. Years would pass, and their love would be tested by drought and disease, by political upheaval and personal loss. They would have children who belonged to both worlds and neither, young people who would grow up to become leaders in their own right. Continuing the work their parents had begun, Jack would eventually hang up his deputy marshal's badge to focus on ranching and diplomacy, becoming an unofficial ambassador between the territorial government and the tribal councils. Ayanna would use her unique position to advocate for her people's rights while also helping other Native women adapt to the changing world around them. But all of that lay in the future. Tonight there was only love and hope and the promise of tomorrow. As the celebration wound down and their guests began to make their way home, Jack and Ayanna remained on their porch, reluctant to break the spell of this perfect moment. "No regrets?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer from the contentment in her dark eyes. "It's only one," Ayanna replied, smiling up at him. "I regret that we wasted so much time being afraid of what people might think instead of trusting what our hearts already knew." And what did our hearts know? Some things are worth fighting for, yet that love doesn't divide us. It makes us more than we could ever be alone. As if to punctuate her words, a shooting star blazed across the night sky, its trail of light reflecting off the distant river. Jack made a wish on that star, not for wealth or fame or even long life, but for the wisdom to always remember this moment, this feeling, this absolute certainty that he was living exactly the life he was meant to live. The cowboy who had rescued a native girl from the river had found more than he'd bargained for. He'd found his salvation, his purpose, and his heart's true home. And as the night settled over the Colorado Territory like a gentle blessing, Jack Sullivan held his wife close and knew that, sometimes, the greatest adventures begin not with riding toward the horizon, but with choosing to stay exactly where you are with the person who makes everywhere feel like home in the distance. A coyote howled at the rising moon, its voice carrying across the prairie like a song of the wild places that would always call to those brave enough to answer. But Jack felt no urge to ride toward that call. His wandering days were over. He had found his place at last, in the arms of the woman who had taught him that true courage wasn't about facing down outlaws or taming wild horses. It was about opening your heart to love, even when that love seemed impossible. The story of the cowboy and the native girl would be told around campfires and dinner tables for generations to come, growing in the telling until it became legend. But for Jack and Ayanna Sullivan, it wasn't a story at all. It was simply their life, difficult, beautiful, and absolutely real. And that was enough. It's more than enough. It was everything.